She's nothing but a burden. Those 5 words didn't just cut through the noise of the dining room, they froze the air itself. The clinking of cutlery stopped. My cousin's laugh caught mid-breath. Even the old clock on the wall seemed to tick louder, mocking the silence that followed. If you think family betrayal can't get worse, wait until you hear what happened at that dinner table. This story will pull you in from the very first line. So don't look away. It was a Sunday evening just past 7. The house smelled of overcooked roast and rosemary, my mother's signature dish, always a little dry but served with pride. Relatives filled the dining room, their voices overlapping in the kind of chatter that sounds warm from the outside but is razor-sharp underneath. The candles flickered unevenly, making the shadows on the walls shift like restless ghosts. I was sitting halfway down the long oak table in my usual seat, not at the head, not near the center. Just far enough to hear everything but easy to ignore. I'd learned that position years ago. It was safer to stay quiet. But tonight, something in her tone didn't just sting. It settled into my chest like a cold stone. I turned my head slowly, pretending to reach for my glass of water, but really to look at her. My mother sat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her eyes glimmering with the satisfaction of a perfectly timed insult. She wasn't angry. She was enjoying herself. That was what made it worse. I didn't flinch. I didn't roll my eyes or give her the satisfaction of a visible wound. Instead, I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that used to confuse her when I was a teenager. It wasn't defiance. It was calculation. The chatter resumed hesitantly. My aunt coughed. Someone reached for the bread basket. But beneath it all, a new current had started running through the room. Subtle, electric. Everyone had heard it. She had said it loud enough for that. And she wanted me to react. My fork hovered above my plate as I replayed her words in my head. Burden. It wasn't the first time. She'd used softer versions before. You're too quiet. You don't do enough. We'd be lost without everyone else. But tonight she stripped away the sugar. She wanted to humiliate me. She leaned back in her chair, her pearls catching the light, and added, "Some children grow up and become blessings. Others," her gaze slid to me like a knife, "they just drain." The room gave a nervous laugh. Not cruel but cowardly. No one wanted to be part of this, but no one would stop her either. That was how it always worked. She spoke, they absorbed. I calmly lowered my fork, wiped my mouth with the napkin, and said softly, "Is that so?" My voice wasn't shaky. It was even, controlled. And for a brief second her smile faltered, not because she was scared, but because she didn't expect me to sound so composed. She was used to my silence, not my calm. Across the table, my cousin shifted uncomfortably. My brother kept eating, pretending not to hear. My aunt stared at the salt shaker as if it could save her. No one wanted to look at me. That was fine. I didn't need witnesses. I rested my phone on my lap, screen facing up. The banking app was still open from earlier that afternoon. A row of transactions stared back at me. Electricity, water, groceries, pharmacy, all paid by me. Quietly. Consistently. Without praise. Without acknowledgement. She didn't know it, but the advantage was already mine. She'd spent years building her image as the strong one, the provider, the matriarch. But behind her throne was my invisible hand keeping the lights on. I looked at her again, this time not as a daughter, but as someone watching a chess opponent make their first careless move. She didn't realize she'd just placed her queen in a dangerous spot. She continued talking, switching to another relative's achievements. My cousin's new job, my brother's responsible nature, my aunt's donations to the church. Each compliment was a brick in the wall she built between us, every gathering. And like clockwork, she'd finish by pointing out my supposed shortcomings. This time she turned to me and asked, "You're still working part-time, right?" It wasn't a question. It was an invitation for mockery. A few chuckles slipped around the table. I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my plate. "I manage," I replied simply. She gave a theatrical sigh. "I just hope you're not relying on the family too much." Her eyes gleamed. She knew exactly what she was doing. Under the table, my thumb tapped my phone screen. I scrolled up, line after line of payments, most of them labeled with her name or her house. She didn't even know how many times her burden had saved her from shut-off notices or late fees. Then came the moment that tipped it all. She looked around the table, raised her voice just a little, and said, You know, not everyone has the strength to carry others. Some of us have to pick up the slack for the ones who never quite grow up. There was a clean strike meant to draw blood. And it did, not because I believed her words but because she was performing them. She wanted the audience. He always did. I took a slow sip of water. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. In fact, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't the first time she'd humiliated me publicly. But this was the first time I wasn't swallowing it. I leaned back slightly, just enough to catch her eye. And then, still in that soft, steady voice, I said, "Let's remember this." Her brow furrowed just a touch. A subtle crack. She didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. But she felt it. I saw it in the way her hand hesitated over the gravy spoon. A small subplot unfolded at the other end of the table. My niece, who had always been curious and sharp, asked me quietly, "Why don't you say something back?" She didn't mean to challenge me. She was genuinely confused. I glanced at her, smiled gently, and replied, "Not everything needs to be said right away." She tilted her head, not quite understanding but sensing something was different tonight. Kids notice shifts before adults do. Meanwhile, my mother resumed her laughter, moving on to another story, this time about how she single-handedly supported my brother through college. I almost laughed. I remembered the bank transfers vividly. Half of those tuition payments came from my account. But I let her talk. I wanted her to keep weaving her web. The roast was dry. The air was warm. The sound of cutlery slowly returned, though the rhythm was off now, like an orchestra where one instrument had gone silent and everyone else was pretending not to notice. Toward the end of the meal, when dessert was being served, her famous apple pie, overly sweet but adored, she made one last remark louder than before: "Some people just take and never give back. But that's family, isn't it? We forgive." I looked straight at her this time. No smile. No mask. Just a steady gaze. She faltered. For half a second she faltered. The chatter dimmed again. The candles flickered lower. And in that thick, uneasy silence I said softly, "I don't need forgiveness for carrying what you can't." The words weren't loud. But they didn't need to be. They landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading across every face at that table. My brother finally looked up. My aunt's fork paused midair. Even the niece stared wide-eyed. My mother stared back at me, trying to read my face. She didn't find the usual resignation there. She found something else, quiet, patient, dangerous. She lifted her chin, trying to regain control. "Don't start a scene," she hissed under her breath. I folded my hands in my lap, phone still glowing faintly against the fabric of my skirt. "I'm not," I said. "I'm just remembering." The clock chimed 8. The gathering slowly loosened up again, people forcing laughter, pretending nothing had shifted. But it had. The current had changed. And she felt it too. When dinner finally ended and people began gathering their coats, she gave me that usual, performative hug, warm for the crowd, cold against my shoulder. I hugged her back, whispering just loud enough for her alone to hear, "Burden, right? We'll see." She stiffened. Then smiled wider for the audience. Always performing. Always underestimating. As I walked to my car under the chilly night air, I opened my phone and stared at the folder of receipts and transfers. For years I'd let her rewrite history at that table. Tonight she handed me the pen back without realizing it. I slid the phone into my purse, started the engine, and looked at the house through the windshield. The windows glowed warmly. Inside she was still talking, still performing. She had no idea that she'd just set something in motion she couldn't control. I drove off slowly, my fingers steady on the wheel, the words still echoing in my head. "She's nothing but a burden." No, not anymore. I drove home in silence, her words still echoing faintly in the quiet of the car. "She's nothing but a burden." The streetlights passed one by one, casting long stretches of gold across the dashboard. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but inside a steady hum had begun, not of anger but of focus. That single word had changed something fundamental. And I wasn't letting it go this time. When I walked through my front door, the house greeted me with the kind of silence that had always felt comforting. A small living room, faint scent of lavender from the candle I'd left burning earlier, the old clock ticking steadily in the hallway. I slipped off my shoes, hung my coat, and placed my purse on the kitchen table. My phone, still warm in my hand, showed the list of transactions I'd looked at earlier. The numbers stared back at me like silent witnesses. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and took a deep breath. I wasn't sure where to begin, but I knew I had to begin. Years of quiet giving, unquestioned help, forgotten favors. All of it had been invisible. She had built a throne on my silence. Tonight that silence ended. I started by pulling up my online banking. The login screen felt colder than usual, like I was entering a vault. Line by line, I scrolled through transactions. Electricity bills, gas, water, groceries, pharmacy runs, emergency transfers. The list was endless. My eyes narrowed as the dates piled up. Some were small. A $40 bill here, a $65 transfer there. Others were heavy. $300 for a sudden plumbing issue. $500 for new appliances she'd needed urgently. I clicked download statement. The printer in the corner of the room whirred to life, slowly spitting out months of quiet generosity in black and white. I spread the pages across the table. The surface disappeared under years of evidence. Each page wasn't just a number. It was a memory. I saw the pharmacy receipt and remembered the night she called me, crying about her blood pressure medication. I saw a grocery payment and recalled her casual, "Oh, you're at the store? Just pick up a few things for me too," followed by a list that filled 2 bags. She always made it sound small. She always made me feel small. But the pages didn't lie. I picked up a highlighter, bright yellow, and began marking every payment tied to her. The room grew quiet except for the sound of the clock and the steady sweep of the marker. With each stroke, a new layer of her version of history peeled back. Around 10 p.m. my phone buzzed. A message from her. You didn't have to leave so early. Everyone noticed. Next time try to be a little more grateful. You looked upset. I stared at the screen for a moment, then turned it face down. No reply. Not tonight. Instead, I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Expenses. Mom's house. I listed every payment, sorted by year, category, and amount. It felt methodical. Necessary. I wasn't just keeping records. I was reclaiming what she'd erased. As the list grew, my emotions shifted. At first there was hurt. Then a quiet sort of vindication. For years I thought I was overreacting when her comments stung. But now, with the evidence laid bare under the lamp's yellow glow, I saw it clearly. She'd relied on me while painting me as worthless. Around midnight I made tea, chamomile, the kind that usually calms me. I sat back down with my mug, letting the steam warm my face, and went through the voice notes on my phone. She had a habit of sending messages instead of calling when she needed something quickly. "Sweetheart, could you just cover this bill for me? I'll sort it next week. You're always so reliable. I don't know what I'd do without you. Can you transfer a little bit? I'll pay you back soon, promise." I pressed play one after another. Her voice filled the room, soft, demanding, guilt-laced. I saved each file, labeling them carefully. I wasn't planning on using them yet, but they were going to stay exactly where I could find them. As I worked, I noticed something. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. Usually when she hurt me, I'd cry quietly after everyone left. But tonight I felt steady. Like a woman who had finally picked up a map after walking blind for years. At one point I paused to stretch my back. Through the kitchen window, I could see my small garden outside, bathed in moonlight. It wasn't much, a few rose bushes, some herbs, but it was mine. I built it with my own hands. No one could rewrite that. That thought grounded me. This was no longer about proving myself to her. It was about drawing a line where she thought none existed. I returned to the table and added another layer to my evidence. Unpaid favors. Things that didn't show up in bank statements. Rides to appointments, handling repairmen, picking up prescriptions. I made bullet points, each one a reminder of how much she depended on me while calling me a burden. By 1 a.m. the folder was thick. I slid the papers inside, neatly stacked, labeled, and tucked away in the drawer of my writing desk. It clicked shut with a quiet finality that felt satisfying. The following morning, as I was making breakfast, my phone rang. It was my brother. "Hey," he started casually. "Mom said you left dinner kind of early. Everything okay?" I stirred my oatmeal slowly. "Everything's fine," I replied evenly. "She said you looked upset." I gave a small laugh. "Did she?" "Boss. You know how she is. Don't take it personally." I didn't respond right away. For years, that sentence had been used like a bandage over a wound that never healed. Don't take it personally. I used to nod, swallow it, and move on. But now I saw how convenient it was, for him, for everyone else, to let her words slide because I absorbed the damage. I'm not upset, I said finally. I'm just taking note. He didn't quite know what to say to that. Okay, well, just don't start anything big. You know how she gets. I know exactly how she gets, I replied and ended the call gently. Later that day I went to the stationery store. I picked up a new binder. Firm spine, clean dividers, crisp sheet protectors. At the checkout the cashier joked, "Tax season already?" I smiled. Something like that. Back home I placed every statement and receipt in chronological order. I punched holes, slid them into protectors, labeled each tab with a year. It looked almost professional, like an accountant's file. But to me it was more than numbers. It was my history, my contribution, my proof. When I closed the binder it felt heavy in my hands, not just physically but symbolically. She had always believed my silence meant she could shape the story. Now for the first time I held the real version. That evening she called. "So," she began lightly, "I hope you're not still brooding about last night." "I'm not brooding," I said calmly, flipping through the binder on my lap. The plastic sleeves made a soft crinkling sound, oddly satisfying. "You always take things so personally," she continued. "It was just a comment. Everyone knows how families tease." I let her talk. She filled the space with justifications and little digs as she always did. But this time I wasn't scrambling for words. I wasn't trying to defend myself. I just listened, like someone who already knew how the game ended. When she paused, waiting for my reaction, I said quietly, "Don't worry. I heard every word." She gave a short laugh, unsure. "Good. Then let's not make a big deal." "No," I replied, "let's not." I hung up before she could reply. That night I placed the binder inside a wooden drawer, not hidden but secured. I slid the key onto my keyring right beside my house key. The folder wasn't a weapon. Not yet. It was preparation. And she had no idea it existed. As I turned off the lights, I paused at the doorway and glanced back at the table. For years I'd walked away from her words with nothing but hurt feelings. Now I walked away with facts. And that made all the difference. This wasn't about vengeance yet. This was about clarity. The kind that comes quietly at night when the world is still, and a woman finally decides she's done being erased. I stood in the doorway of my dim kitchen, staring at the drawer where the binder now rested. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in years that silence didn't feel heavy. It felt controlled. I turned off the last light and climbed the stairs slowly, the wood creaking softly beneath my feet. As I reached the top step my phone buzzed. A notification flashed across the screen. "Family lunch, Sunday 1 p.m. It was from my mother's group chat, the one she used to announce family gatherings as if they were royal decrees. I read it twice, my finger hovering over the screen. A small, almost involuntary smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. She had chosen the stage herself. The next morning the sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting long gold stripes across my living room floor. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat with my tea by the window. Normally these family lunches felt like obligations. Predictable performances with the same stories repeated until they lost their meaning. But this time I felt different. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't dreading it. I was planning. It started simply. I walked to my writing desk and opened the drawer. The binder gleamed faintly in the morning light, its spine firm, its tabs neat. I lifted it out carefully like a precious artifact and placed it on the table. One flip through the pages was enough to remind me why I was doing this. Every highlighted amount, every printed receipt, every voice note label. They told a story she had spent years rewriting. This wasn't about embarrassing her for sport. It was about finally speaking in a language she couldn't twist. Numbers, dates, facts. The kind that didn't bend under her charm. Later that afternoon my niece dropped by unexpectedly. She was in her 20s, curious, blunt in a way only young people can be. She plopped onto my couch and kicked off her sneakers. "You left dinner early the other night," she said. "Grandma's been talking about it." I handed her a glass of lemonade. "I know," I replied, sitting across from her. "She said you were upset." I gave a small laugh. I wasn't upset. Just observant. She tilted her head, studying me. You seem different. I raised an eyebrow. Different how? Like you're holding a secret, she said, grinning. She wasn't wrong. I didn't answer. Instead, I changed the subject to her classes, letting her chatter fill the room. But her words stuck with me after she left. Like you're holding a secret. For years I had been predictable, quiet, passive, easy to overlook. Now the shift was subtle but undeniable. And people could sense it. The days leading up to the lunch passed slowly but steadily. Each morning I added a small piece to my preparation, not out of paranoia but precision. I printed a fresh summary page for the binder, a clean, chronological list of the major expenses with bold totals at the bottom. Seeing it all on one page made the reality even starker. Then I tested my printer, made duplicate copies and slipped them into a slim envelope tucked discreetly inside the binder. I wasn't sure if I'd need them, but I liked knowing they were there. It was like having spare matches in a storm. At the grocery store I ran into my brother's wife, Karen. She was always pleasant in that cautious way people are when they don't want to get too involved. Are you coming Sunday? She asked, picking up a pack of napkins. Wouldn't miss it, I said lightly, placing apples into a bag. She lowered her voice. Your mom seems extra this week. She's been calling everyone, making sure it's a big turnout. Of course she was. My mother loved an audience. I simply smiled. That's perfect. She gave me a curious look, but I left it at that. By Saturday evening the house felt different. I ironed my blouse carefully, laid out a simple skirt and polished my shoes, not out of vanity but intention. I wanted no distractions, no comments about my appearance, no easy outs for her to redirect attention. I placed the binder into my leather handbag, the one she'd once mocked for being too formal. It fit perfectly, like it was meant to be there. That night I didn't toss or turn. I slept soundly for the first time in a long while. Sunday arrived clear and bright. As I drove to her house I noticed the way my heartbeat stayed steady. Usually these gatherings made my chest tighten before I even parked. But this time I felt composed. Her house was already busy when I arrived. Cars lined the driveway. Through the open windows, I could hear the clatter of dishes and my mother's loud, cheerful voice orchestrating everything like a conductor. Inside, the smell of roasted chicken and baked potatoes filled the air. She had outdone herself, of course. I greeted relatives politely, accepting hugs and cheek kisses, listening to the same light conversations, work updates, weather complaints, family gossip. But my eyes kept finding her at the head of the dining room, where she stood giving instructions as if she owned the world. She spotted me and smiled wide, arms open. There she is, she exclaimed, loud enough for everyone to hear. I was starting to think you'd hide away again. I stepped into the light, kissed her cheek and said, I wouldn't miss this for anything. Something in my tone made her pause for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Just a flicker. But I saw it. As the guests settled, I moved around the house helping with small things. Setting out cutlery, refilling drinks, checking the oven. It was almost reflexive, this quiet labor I'd always done for her. But this time I noticed something. She didn't thank me once. He never did. He expected it. And for the first time I didn't resent it. I simply observed. Every unspoken expectation was being quietly catalogued in my mind. An hour before lunch, while most of the family gathered in the backyard, I slipped into the empty dining room. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns across the long table. It was perfectly set. Polished silverware, floral centerpieces, folded napkins shaped like fans. I pulled out the chair nearest to hers, not my usual seat in the shadows but one directly across. I placed my handbag gently at my feet. The binder inside felt heavy against the wooden floor, like a secret heartbeat. I traced my fingers along the smooth edge of the table. This was where it would happen. Not in some dramatic outburst but here, calmly, publicly, undeniably. The stage was perfect. And she had built it herself. As the relatives began to drift back inside, my brother approached me. Hey, he said quietly, you seem unusually calm today. I gave him a small, almost amused look. Is that a bad thing? No, he said slowly. Just different. He glanced toward our mother, who was laughing loudly near the kitchen doorway, entertaining a small crowd. She's in a mood today, he added under his breath. Careful. Always. I replied and turned back to arranging a few serving spoons. He didn't notice the slight smile on my lips. When everyone finally gathered at the table, the chatter rose again. Overlapping voices, the clink of glasses, the scraping of chairs. My mother stood at the head, tapping her fork against her glass for attention. "Before we eat," she declared, "I just want to say how grateful I am to have this family together. Some people understand the value of family, and some have yet to learn." A few polite laughs followed. She gave me a pointed glance. I held her gaze, unblinking. She moved on, launching into one of her usual speeches. Light anecdotes, exaggerated praise for some, gentle digs at others. He loved this part, controlling the rhythm of the room. But today I wasn't part of her rhythm. I was waiting for the right note to step in. As the chicken was carved and plates were passed around, small conversations bloomed. My aunt asked about my garden. My cousin complained about work. The normal flow resumed, warm, noisy, predictable. But under the table my hand rested on the leather strap of my bag. My fingers brushed the binder inside. A quiet reminder, I was ready. As lunch began, I noticed something else. She was watching me more than usual. Between jokes and chatter, her eyes would flick toward me as if trying to read a language she didn't know. She sensed it even if she couldn't name it. The shift. I lifted my glass of water, met her gaze across the table and smiled. Fully. She tilted her head, confused for just a second. The perfect stage was set. And she didn't even realize she'd built the platform on which her own words would echo back to her. And that was all I needed. The noise of the lunch swelled around us. The scraping of forks against plates, laughter bouncing from one end of the table to the other, chairs shifting on the polished floor. It looked like any other family lunch. But beneath that surface something was shifting. I could feel it in my chest, steady and deliberate, like the tightening of a knot that had been loose for too long. I rested my hands on the edge of the table, my fingers brushing the cool wood. My handbag sat by my feet, heavy with the binder inside. I didn't move yet. Timing mattered. If I interrupted her too early, she'd laugh it off and steer the conversation. If I waited too long, she'd finish lunch wrapped in her own narrative again. I'd spent years watching her control rooms like this. I knew exactly when to step in. The moment came halfway through the meal. She had just finished telling a story about how she single-handedly helped my brother through his first job interviews, complete with her usual embellishments. The relatives laughed on cue like background actors who knew their lines. She took a sip of water, placed the glass down and then, almost casually, said, "Of course some people in this family just take. They never give back. But we love them anyway." Her eyes slid to me like a spotlight. The laughter was softer this time. Easy. I met her gaze, steady. No smile. No retreat. Then quietly I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped against the floor, slicing through the chatter like a blade. Heads turned. Forks froze mid-air. She blinked, surprised by the sudden sound. I stood slowly, smoothing my blouse with calm hands. "I'd like to say something," I said. For a moment she looked amused, like she thought I was about to apologize or make some sentimental toast. "Of course, dear," she replied, in that sickly sweet tone that had always made me feel 12 years old again. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I bent down, lifted my handbag and set it gently on the table beside my plate. The zipper opened with a clean sound. My fingers found the spine of the binder. When I pulled it out, the plastic cover caught the light, flashing briefly across the room like a signal. A few relatives exchanged puzzled looks. My brother frowned slightly. My niece leaned forward, curious. She, on the other hand, tilted her head again. "What's this?" she asked, half laughing. I didn't answer. I opened the binder slowly, flipping to the first page. The sound of plastic sleeves sliding against each other was crisp in the quiet room. My heart didn't race. It beat in a calm, powerful rhythm, the rhythm of someone who had rehearsed this in her head for weeks. "I want to talk about what it means to take in this family," I began softly, "because for years that word has been thrown around carelessly. Especially about me." Her smile froze. Just slightly. Enough for me to see the first crack. I lifted the first page and turned it toward the table. A printed bank statement, highlighted rows marking payments. "This," I said, tapping the page, "is from 2018. Electricity bills. Every month paid by me. Quietly. I didn't rush. I turned another page. Groceries. Pharmacy runs. Emergency home repairs. Temporary loans that were never repaid. Whispers began around the table. My aunt adjusted her glasses. My cousin leaned closer to see. The air shifted from confusion to stunned focus. She gave a shaky laugh. What is this, some kind of presentation? No, I said calmly. This is a record. Something no one has ever heard because I never said it. Until now. I flipped through the pages, reading numbers aloud, not dramatically but clearly the way someone might read a verdict. $312 for a plumbing emergency. $487 for new appliances. $82 for prescriptions. $230 for groceries during the holidays. Repeated year after year. Each number landed in the room like a soft thud. No yelling. No theatrics. Just truth laid bare. I saw my brother's eyes widen. He knew about some of it but not all. My niece covered her mouth. Even Karen, my brother's wife, sat up straighter, blinking rapidly. My mother tried to interrupt. This is ridiculous. I raised a hand gently, not aggressively. Please. You've had the floor for years. Let me finish. The firmness in my voice startled even me. But it worked. She leaned back, stunned. I turned to a section labeled Voice Notes. I had transcribed some of the messages she'd sent me over the years. I didn't play them, I didn't need to. I read one aloud, my voice mimicking her tone lightly. Sweetheart, can you just cover this bill? I'll sort it next week. Another, you're always so reliable. I don't know what I'd do without you. The irony hung in the air. People shifted in their seats. I closed the binder halfway and looked directly at her. You've told this family for years that I take and you give. But the truth is, you've been standing on what I've quietly built behind the scenes. You've built your image on my silence. Her mouth opened but no words came out. Emotion rose in my chest, not anger but a kind of raw relief. The weight I had carried for so long wasn't on my shoulders anymore. It was on the table in black and white for everyone to see. I didn't stop there. This isn't about embarrassing you. It's about setting the record straight. You've told your version for too long. This is mine. My brother finally spoke. Is this all real? I nodded. Every line. Every receipt. Every transfer. The room fell into a heavy silence. Only the clock on the wall dared to make a sound, ticking steadily like a witness giving testimony. She tried to laugh again but it came out brittle. So what, you're keeping score now? Is that what this is? I tilted my head, mirroring the way she had earlier. No. You brought up taking and giving. I'm just answering honestly. She reached for her glass of water but her hand trembled slightly. It was the first time I had ever seen her physically unsettled in front of family. I placed a final sheet on the table, the summary page. Clean, bold, undeniable. For years you called me a burden. But according to the numbers, I've carried more than anyone here. My aunt whispered to my uncle. I had no idea. Karen looked at my brother wide-eyed. My niece stared at me with something new in her eyes. Respect, maybe. Or awe. She cleared her throat, trying to regain control. Well, families help each other. That's what we do. Yes, I said quietly. They do. But they don't call the ones who help burdens. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy like the air right before a storm breaks. And then, deliberately, I closed the binder, slid it into my bag and stood tall. From this day forward, I said, my voice steady, every contribution I make will be recognized. And if it's not, it won't happen. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply spoke the truth out loud for the first time. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. And in a way she didn't. The woman standing before her wasn't the quiet daughter she could control with guilt and public jabs. This was someone who had quietly built her power piece by piece, and finally laid it bare. No one moved as I walked around the table, collecting empty glasses, setting them near the sink, small, mundane gestures. But the control of the room had shifted completely. She tried to pick up her story where she left off, but her voice wavered. No one laughed this time. The performance was over. And she knew it. She sat there, hands wrapped around her glass, knuckles pale, while the chatter around the table sputtered like a fire losing oxygen. Plates sat half-finished. People shifted awkwardly, glancing between her and me, unsure of what to say. I collected the last glass from the table and placed it beside the sink, the sound of it settling on the counter echoing in the heavy silence. My movements were calm, deliberate, not rushed, not nervous. Just steady. She cleared her throat. "Well," she said finally, her voice thinner than before. "That was quite a show." I turned slowly to face her. "No," I said quietly. That was the truth. For the first time in a long while she had no comeback. When the lunch finally broke up, people didn't linger the way they usually did. Hugs were shorter. Conversations were clipped. They filed out in small groups, their faces still carrying the weight of what they'd just witnessed. My brother avoided my eyes. My aunt squeezed my hand in silence before stepping outside. My niece was the last to leave. She walked over wide-eyed but smiling faintly. "You really did it," she whispered. I met her gaze and nodded. "I did." Her voice lowered. "Grandma's not going to like this." "She doesn't have to," I replied softly. "She just has to live with it." My niece hesitated as if she wanted to say more, then gave me a quick hug and slipped out the door. And then it was just us. Me and her. In that dining room that had always been hers. She stood slowly, gripping the back of her chair for balance. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said, bitterness lacing her voice. "Humiliating me like that." I walked back to the table, my footsteps echoing on the tile. "I didn't humiliate you," I said evenly. "You did that all on your own. I just showed the truth you've been hiding behind." Her mouth opened then closed. She looked around the empty room like she was searching for an audience to back her up, but they were gone. All that remained was the echo of her own words, finally unmasked. She gave a sharp laugh. "Fine. You've made your point. What do you want then? Gratitude? A medal?" I shook my head slowly. "No. I don't want anything." And I meant it. For years I'd unconsciously sought her acknowledgement, her approval. But standing there, binder back in my bag, her power cracked wide open, I realized I didn't need either. What I wanted wasn't hers to give. I left soon after, walking to my car under the bright afternoon sun. My hands didn't tremble when I started the engine. My mind didn't replay the confrontation obsessively. For the first time in decades, I drove away from her house feeling light. The next few weeks were quiet, eerily so. She didn't call. No group messages about Sunday dinners. No sudden emergency transfers. She vanished into the silence like a queen without a court. Then slowly small ripples started reaching me. My aunt mentioned that the electricity bill at her house had gone unpaid for the first time in years. My brother called to ask if I had heard anything from her, his voice uneasy. I hadn't. And I wasn't going to be the first to reach out. She had spent years building her comfort on the foundation of my quiet contributions. Now without them, cracks were showing. One afternoon, while watering the roses in my garden, my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello." Her voice was sharp at first. "I suppose you're satisfied. Everyone's talking." "I'm not interested in gossip," I said calmly. She exhaled slowly. There was a pause, the kind that comes before pride starts to crack. "The bills are piling up," she said finally, her voice lower. I said nothing. "You've made your point," she continued, impatience seeping through. "Now fix what you broke." I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the wind rustle through the leaves. "I didn't break anything," I said. "I just stopped holding it together for you." She was silent. Over the next month the consequences grew. She'd always been meticulous about appearances. Flowers at the entrance, lights glowing through the evening, her house smelling faintly of cinnamon. But little by little the illusion faded. My niece sent me a photo one evening. A stack of unpaid notices taped to the front door, the porch light off, the yard overgrown. The caption was simple. "She's stubborn, but she's struggling." I stared at the image for a long time. Not with glee. Not with guilt. With clarity. She had always believed that calling me a burden would keep me beneath her. She never imagined that one day I'd let her carry the weight herself. Eventually she came to my door. It was late afternoon. The sky was streaked orange and pink, the air heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass. I saw her through the window before she knocked, standing on my porch in a plain sweater, no jewelry, no carefully curated look. Just her. I opened the door slowly. She didn't step inside. She held herself differently, less upright, more human. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I need your help," she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a speech. Just 5 words. But they carried more weight than anything she'd ever said. I leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Help with what?" "The bills," she admitted. "Everything's harder than I thought." I studied her face. For years she had wielded control through pride, through the unspoken assumption that I'd always be there. Now she stood at my door with that pride cracked down the middle. In that moment I could have rushed in. I could have rescued her like I always did. But this time I didn't. "I can't do that anymore," I said softly. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said steady and clear, "that if you want the house to stand, you'll have to hold it up yourself." She stepped back slightly as if the words physically landed on her chest. "After everything I've done for you." I held up a hand. "Stop. We both know that story isn't true anymore. You built your comfort on mine. You erased it with your words. And now you get to live with the truth." Her jaw tightened. She turned her head as if to look away, but there was nowhere to escape to. We stood in silence for a long moment, the evening breeze moving between us. Finally she said, "You've changed." I shook my head. "No. I just stopped letting you rewrite me." And then I closed the door gently. Not slammed. Just closed. Firm, final. Through the window I watched her walk down the steps slowly, her figure framed by the fading sunlight. She looked smaller than I remembered. Months passed. She learned to manage, not perfectly but enough. She sold some jewelry. She started paying her own bills on time. She stopped hosting grand lunches. The house became quieter. Her kingdom shrank, but it was hers to tend now. Me. I began to live without the invisible weight pressing on my shoulders. I visited friends. Tended to my garden. Rediscovered what my days felt like when they weren't tied to her needs. I wasn't cruel. But I was done carrying what wasn't mine. The last time I saw her in that dining room, months later, the table was smaller, the flowers fewer, the lights dimmer. She looked at me differently. Not with superiority. Not with open warmth either. Something in between. Something real. She didn't apologize. Not outright. But she didn't call me a burden again either. Some truths don't need repeating once they've been exposed. As I left that evening, I paused at her doorway. The house behind her stood quieter but upright. She was finally holding it up herself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for walking away. I felt free. She called me a burden once. I let her carry the weight and she finally understood what it meant. If this story shook you, hit subscribe. We share dark, emotional revenge stories every week. True-to-life narratives that leave you speechless. Don't miss the next one.